Real quick before jumping into the video, I actually have launched a Patreon, even though I'm very against this idea of putting the onus on you to support my content. I do this for fun, I do this as a hobby, but at the same time, I've actually just recently moved and am in between jobs, so I'm looking at ways to potentially make content creation more lucrative for myself so I actually can bridge together some of the income that I'm lacking right now. So with that said, we'll jump into the main video, and thanks for watching. Top of the morning, my trade-ins. It's Mansant, and what an incredible weekend I just had at SCGCon Syracuse, where I was able to take this Blood Debt Mandible Claws build all the way to the finals of the, I think, second biggest road to nationals in the world. So even though I didn't place first, I had a ton of fun playing this deck, and it was kind of just a true experimental deck, just trying out some of the new toys that this Uprising set brought to Levia, because it did bring a few goodies, not too many, but things that were worth experimenting with and things that actually performed really well on the weekend. So I wanted to jump into the deck tech here and keep it very short. In fact, heavily inspired by the way Hayden Dale runs his deck techs on Arsenal Pass. So we're just going to look at the beginnings of why I even brought this deck and what the thought process was there. And that is because the Mandible Claw version of Levia is the most volatile way to play her. It's very heavy into Blood Debt, and it tends to be the deck that has the most trouble in high-level tournaments because you're just playing with this extra loss condition of Blood Debt that a lot of good players can really abuse. However, even though the volatility of this playstyle is high, there's a new card that came out with Uprising that I thought would really help this strategy, and that was Crown of Providence. Crown of Providence, I think, is the kind of perfect card for the Levia deck when you play with the Blood Debt, because it lets you not only hand fix to try to find a way to turn off Blood Debt, it lets you dig for potential resource cards that you need, and it lets you find a better arsenal, effectively trading it out for a new card, which can always be an issue with Levia when you end up drawing extra cards off like Blood Rush or Art of War, and then just end up with something you don't really want to arsenal. That always felt really bad. Now you can freely toss those cards in like a Beast Within or like a Blue Convulsions just to know that the Crown of Providence is going to save you there. And then of course this card also protects you from Command and Conquer really well, almost to the degree where it's like a second Husk, because a lot of times you would use your Carrion Husk to block a Command and Conquer. So I thought Crown of Providence was the real key that this kind of deck needed to smooth it all together, make it run smooth as butter, and boy, it really did. But that was only one piece of the puzzle here. The other card I really wanted to try out was Trade In. There were a lot of people talking about it on the League of Levia Discord, which you are free to join in the description below. Trade In is this interesting card that lets you hand fix a bit, coming out of Arsenal, discarding a card, drawing a new card. If that card was a 6, you can then turn on your Mandible Claws, or perhaps, help dig if you had an all-red hand to just cycle for resources. Thought this card had a lot of utility in Levia, and I just wanted to see what it actually felt like on the table, and it actually put in a lot of work. So that was everything that I thought about going into the event here, and the deck itself we'll actually jump to right now. So one of the strongest parts in playing this Blood Debt Levia build is that you unlock all these crazy strong combinations of smaller hand sizes. Because Levia is not really a deck that uses her large hands very effectively, that normally tends to mean you have to roll something like Scabskin Leathers to even have enough action points to play out everything. So instead what you're trying to do with a Blood Debt Levia deck is actually block pretty well, preserve HP, and then return back with really, really effective smaller hand sizes for above damage trades. So one of the main ways to pull that off, and honestly the main reason to play this deck with Mandible Claws, is Boneyard Marauder and Blood Rush Bellow. What you're going for here is a Boneyard Marauder in Arsenal, playing a Blood Rush Bellow, pitching a blue, leaving 2 resources floating, hoping to draw just 1 more blue, because that lets you pay for Mandible Claws, and then 1 resource floating for that last Boneyard Marauder for 18 damage with an extra card in hand for your reset arsenal. It is incredibly strong, it's a huge damage push across some weird breakpoints, and is, like I said, the main reason to play this Mandible Claw build at all, is this beautiful, beautiful cost curve. One of the other really powerful combos she has are just her 2-card hands. Levia has access to Deadwood Rumbler, which comes in for 1 blue pitch and swinging 8, with this amazing effect that actually is more relevant these days because this ability to banish a card from graveyard not only has the flexibility of turning off your own Blood Debt, but can now target things like Phoenix Flame in your opponent's graveyard for really, really high value. And then you have Endless Maw, which is just an all-star, coming in for 9 if it hits its banish trigger, which of course you hope you're playing for, and ends up being just amazing ways to trade well, return with 2 cards, and buy yourself yourself that extra time to arsenal because you've over-traded on damage. One of the other just most flexible combos in the deck would be Dread Screamer and Graveling Growl. Off of 1 blue, you can come in with Dread Screamer for 6, leave 1 floating, and then Graveling Growl for 7, which ends up being 13 damage for 2 cards, for 3 cards, which is just incredible. But both of these cards have extra flexibility in that this go again is insanely important for any other attack you're trying to throw at your opponent, and the Graveling Growl also having amazing synergy with Art of War. So it's one of your more flexible combos, but if you can pull off the 3-card hand for 13, it's fantastic. Another main reason to actually play Blood Debt Levia is because you get to jump into these recursion loops with Howl from Beyond. This card cannot be overstated in how strong it is in beating decks that try to block you out and let you die to Blood Debt. With this double Howl from Beyond in the deck, you can get into a loop scenario where all you need is to have played an attack, clear out your graveyard, and then this ends up being the last card in graveyard, right? You go into your next turn cycle where you now have 2 blues and you're able to pitch into 1 Howl, 2 Howl, they go to grave, you're not 3 in grave, and then with the extra 2 resources floating, you play another one of these that then resets those 3 cards and is the last card in grave again. And then you can just set up that loop to go on for as many of these 2 cost attacks as you have in the deck, because they will automatically clear out the Howls and the 6 power you played previously. So it ends up being a really strong loop, and you can stack it with effects like the Dominate from Writhing Beastalk here, which is really important, or adding breakpoints to it like with Hungering Slaughter Beast. So really, really strong core of the deck here. Then we had something new that I was trying out with Trade-In and Beast Within. So Beast Within is a fun card to use in conjunction with Blood Rush Bellow, or to play around with discard effects that your opponent may throw at you. But I wanted to try to actively turn on that banish and draw effect with Trade-In, and wanted to see how consistent it would be on the weekend. And actually, it only really came up maybe 1 or 2 games, but pulling that off, this Trade-In coming out of Arsenal, discarding a Beast Within, turning off Blood Debt with Beast Within, drawing a card off of it, and then drawing another card off of Trade-In, and turning on your Mandible Claws, ends up being a lot of cards and a lot of new resource outlets for you to pitch into. It was really strong, not that consistent, but just knowing that a Trade-In in Arsenal could always turn on that play, and also knowing that a Trade-In in Arsenal would protect you from things like all red hands, felt actually really strong. Then we've got some of the other pieces in Levia here. We'll jump over here actually in Art of War and Ghostly Visit. So Art of War is a card that I actually use a lot in Levia. I know some people aren't so hot on it, but I absolutely love it for 2 main reasons. Number one, it is the huge enabler in actually letting your big hands do something powerful, because otherwise you are very action point reliant on rolling scab skins. But just having an Art of War means whenever you did force your opponent to block out, or they just had a poor turn or anything like that, Art of War lets you turn your hands into something really, really explosive, and can even benefit even more so if you banish the Ghostly Visit, because then you're basically playing a chain deck and have just given yourself +1 intellect by banishing the Ghostly Visit and letting you play it right back out from the banish zone. So I really, really like Art of War in Blood Debt Levia still. It turns off Blood Debt. You can play it early game to be even a bit more defensive. And you want to be playing Ghostly Visits anyway because of the synergy Ghostly Visit has in playing alongside Writhing Beastalk and Hungering Slaughter Beast with a blue. You are pretty free to roll Scab Skins, try to get an extra action point to just toss in a Ghostly Visit for 4 damage alongside one of these anyway. So I like having Ghostly Visit in the deck regardless, and just has better synergy with Art of War. And then we also have one of the newer combos still from Everfest, which is Unworldly Bellow plus Swing Big. This ends up being another 3-card hand for 12, where Unworldly Bellow banishes 3, doesn't care if it hits, although of course you want it to then give +4 to your Swing Big, which comes in for 12. So it's not quite the level of 13 damage off 3 cards like Dread Screamer, but it is really, really strong, and these cards are very flexible anyway, and that Swing Big can be played early game, and Unworldly Bellows can also be played on top of these guys if you really want to. Then the last thing about playing this Blood Debt Levia is that you get access to Carrion Husk, and right now, with Chain gone, you are the only deck that can abuse the trade factor that Carrion Husk brings to the table in letting you just completely pivot tempo by blocking out some really strong turn from your opponent and then launching right back into what you wanted to do. Because Levia is not a deck that really has hit effects to make your opponent block out, but you have so much overwhelming stat pressure behind things like Endless Maw, the Dread Screamers, that when you add the extra life you've also gained through Carrion Husk, you can start to actually take away games through these incremental leads from your damage, and then a huge tempo swing with the Husk itself buying you life. So really strong deck for the current metagame, I think, in trading aggressively. It ends up lining really well. It really did on the weekend, and I had a lot of fun playing this build, but let's check out the actual specifics of what's in it. So in every matchup on the weekend, I took the same 53 cards, I'm pretty sure in every one of my 9 games. And this is what it would have looked like. So really, as I explained in the core, you've got the core attacks that make up every reason you want to play this hero. You've got your big combo enablers in Blood Rush, Art of War, and then you've got your blue base. And your blue base is what I want to talk more specifically about on this, because we already went into what this was for, but the blue base actually has a lot of flexibility in this deck because, you know, number one, first and foremost, you need to be turning off Blood Debt. So you actually have some blues that do that really well for you. Number one being Dread Screamer in blue. Even though the rate is poor, it's not a 6, it's not what you want in this card, it still has the go again, and it still has a decent cost curve for you, letting you drop a Graveling Growl at the end of it, or if you have a larger hand, playing into any of your larger attacks. So as a blue, Dread Screamer is still really, really valuable for the deck. And then also Unworldly Bellow as a blue, because this is a smaller buff that still fits the cost curve of the deck, letting you play it on top of Swing Big, or these guys, turning off Blood Debt once again. And then Convulsions really is your all-star blue card. This one gives you Dominate on it hitting a 6 in graveyard, and that is so incredibly strong for closing out the game. If it's late game, your opponent is trying to full block you out, let you die to Blood Debt, a Convulsions can just seal it out of nowhere. You can play it either on a small hand like a blue Convulsions and a Graveling coming in for 8 Dominate, or with a larger hand you can go for even an Endless Maw Dominate, maybe some Howl from Beyond's in there, Dominate. This card is just an all-star. Then you've got your 6s that you just have to run for the synergy that Levia needs in Wrecker Romp and Deadwood Rumbler, which are actually okay to play out early game as well, just to fill graveyard a little bit. Then you've got kind of your weakest blue slot, I think, in blue Endless Maw. This card is just a 2-card hand that comes back for a red rate. You know, coming in for 2 cards for 7 is a very good rate, but one of the issues with it is that it's going to clear 3 cards from your graveyard, but leave you with only now a miss in the yard with this 4 attack that it has base. So that's pretty weak for the deck, but if you have to play out these weaker tempo hands, at least Endless Maw comes in at, you know, a red rate. Right, so it's okay. It also has minor synergy in Art of War, letting you banish it to draw. And then you've got Doomsday and Soul Harvest, which I'm pretty sure I played Soul Harvest maybe 2 times over the weekend, and Doomsday actually almost every game. It is actually incredible right now with how aggressive you can play with Crown of Providence, helping you out, fixing your otherwise clunky hands that would slow you down. You can just play very aggressive. You can build up Blood Debt and then summon Blasmafet out there to then start rolling with Scab Skins. That's one of the main reasons you keep Scab Skins in the deck with Gambler's Gloves here, is for your ability to either throw out Ghostlies as much as possible or swing with Blasmafet as much as possible, because you need to satiate this big boy. He's our demon lord, right? So with that, we'll talk about the sideboard. So as far as the sideboard goes with all this, like I said, I was at 53 cards in the main deck, and then Levia's a deck that, you know, the pressure's on to end the game before really you're going through your second cycle all too much. So because of that, I would always aim to run at a clean 60 cards. So I would normally take, you know, 2 of these packages in combination plus 1 extra utility blue. So to go through some of that, my main anti-aggro package was with Ghostly Visits and then the double trade-in and Command and Conquer. Now I would take the triple Ghostly because it blocks for 3, which is really good value, and then it's a card that actually rewards you for blocking with early game, because then you can always try to cheat in extra damage with your Scab Skins, letting you swing in with Ghostly Visit really efficiently on those Hungering and Writhing Beastalk turns, or do something even crazier with Art of War. I would take in the trade-ins because in an aggro matchup, what you really end up losing to is an all-red hand that just makes you stutter and stumble. So trade-ins was just a little bit of extra protection against that. And then I'd also run 1 Command and Conquer, mostly for a little cheese, because Levia is a pretty fair deck. So to include just that little extra spice to where my opponent assumes, oh, he's not running any hit effects, I can go ahead and waste my armor on just vanilla damage, but then you throw in that Command and Conquer and really punish them, could be a big deal. It actually never came up, but that was the idea behind this package. And then against aggro, I'd also run a Reckless Swing, because it lets you end the game an extra half turn cycle early, and an aggro deck's going to be very greedy in taking damage to try to kill you, so they normally do end up getting to Reckless Swing range. Then I had Deadwood Rumbler, and Deadwood Rumbler was in here namely for 3 things. Number 1 being Wizard, because it's just an extra bit of graveyard fill that isn't too hand demanding, so you can still pitch into Null Rune. And then also for Fi, In Fi, I would take it over these alongside the Ghostlies and Reckless to potentially banish the Phoenix Flame from Graveyard, which is really strong in that matchup, just ends up saving you, at least 4-6 life, something like that over the course of a game. Then also versus Viscerai, because you can target the Swarming Gloomveil from their graveyard with the effect here, and that really messes up their smaller hands with Rattlebones, so that ends up being pretty important in just closing the game when it gets really tight, because Null Rune is not something I run in that matchup, and so all those weird breakpoints is how they normally close the game against you. So take that in there. Then we have the more exciting part of the sideboard, which would be the Recursion Suite, which I really love playing this. I wish he brought it into more matchups, but I only really take this in against Wizards for one, against the Guardians. Sometimes kind of depends how I can scout out against the Rhinar players. If they're on more of a slow strategy, I'll take that, and then against Dromai as well. So you've got double Howl from Beyond, Deep Rooted Evil, and then 3 Shadow Blasphemfets. So the Howl from Beyonds, like I explained, are part of this recursion loop. Deep Rooted Evil is in here because it's a pretty inefficient card to play out, but if your opponent is trying to fatigue you, then anytime you have an extra action point, you might as well sink your resources into the Deep Rooted instead, because you're preserving cards in deck, hopefully preserving cards that turn off Blood Debt inside your deck, and still coming in for 6 and refilling Graveyard. So it ends up being okay there. And then 3 Shadow and Blasphemfets as a way to tutor these out early, get your Graveyard fill going as well. But like I said, they don't really come into that many matchups. Alongside this package is when I tend to run the Eye of Ophidia as my choice blue, because it lets you manipulate what the top of your deck is going into some of your big draws with Blood Rush or Art of War, because if you draw all reds off the back of those, you lose a lot of potential damage that your deck was trying to deal. So that helps fix it a little bit. Then it also fixes the draw discard on Shadow Blasphemfet. So I tend to see this as more valuable, especially over the Reckless Swing, because a lot of these decks are just not going to try to get in that range anyway, and they'll still assume that you have one, but you're not sure on ways to close the game because of all the Dominate that's in the deck anyway. Then the last card here is the Energy Potion, and this one's just as my choice blue against Bravo in particular, OG Bravo, because the way that deck wins the game against you is by blocking out very heavily and then saving HP so that on a big turn when he has Crippling Crush and a Pummel, he can tank your hit, return, and just try to wipe your whole hand out of there so that you die to Blood Debt, or at least take a huge chunk of Blood Debt. But your way to play around that is by having an Energy Potion in play and having a way to turn off Blood Debt in Arsenal. That way, even if you lose your entire hand, you can crack Energy Potion, return back with a Hungering, Writhing Beast Hulk, whatever, and you don't just instant lose. You don't even take Blood Debt. So it ends up being absolutely a blowout in that matchup. So I was running the one just in case there were any Bravos on the day, but I don't think there was one. So let's look at the equipment. So like I said, this was primarily a Mandible Claws version of the deck, and alongside a Mandible Claws, I'd always run this equipment suite of just a huge amount of fridge armor. Crown of Providence, absolutely key as I explained. Carrion Husk as well. Scabskins and Gamblers being a combination combo. You can't really play one without the other because rolling a 1 with Levia is just an absolute death sentence, so you need Gamblers to recover there. But I did respect Wizard. I was thinking there'd be a bit of Icelander at this event, so I opted to go for a specifically anti-Icelander version of Null Rune, which is Skullhorn plus Null Rune Robe. And the reason you go these pieces is because it lets you open to have Scabskins and Gamblers, which can be very important in that matchup to play out extra threats like that Deep Rooted Evil that you might have in your Banish Zone, or even just an extra weapon swing in Ravenous Meat Axe. So Ravenous Meat Axe I take in the Wizard matchups over the Claws because it's just that extra bit of graveyard fill in the beginning of the game, and whenever you have a source of go again, it just means you have a pretty effective weapon on the table in returning damage so that you can preserve those cards in hand, those otherwise attacks that you would throw out, and still protecting yourself with Null Rune a little bit. So that's what I took on the day, and it ended up being really effective. Just to talk about matchups really briefly while we look at these beautiful alt arts. I went into this event really not expecting much, which is kind of the way it goes with Levia. I always know that I'll have a good day if my deck does what I want it to, and I'll have a bad day if I just, blunder a bit with drawing cards in the wrong sequence, which is always this deck's downfall, or just face too much Viscerai, which I consider to be the worst matchup in the world for Levia. But as we showed up on the day, round 1, I beat an Icelander who is relatively new to the deck, and my plan here worked amazingly, just pushed right through his game plan. And then my round 2 was a Viscerai, really good player out of Canada, one of Isaac Kroot's team. And I thought, oh boy, this is when I absolutely just start a loss streak. But I was able to win that match, which was kind of fantastic. It was a pretty assured victory as well. I just had a lot of things go my way. In the early game, I believe I played like double Blood Rush that game, and just put up enough pressure to really close it out. And in that matchup these days, you really do feel the lack of Bloodsheath Skeleta on their end, because not only was the OTK playstyle like unwinnable for you, but it was also just a lot of HP to fight through. And now their chess piece ends up being like Tunic or Aether Ironweave, which you just outvalue a ton with your own equipment suite here. So that was a win. And then round 3, I played against a Rhinar. The Rhinar player knew who I was, and was on a really like fun mesh version of like playing aggressive along with the pummel strat. And I will say I got blown out by like a pummel early game and really thought the game was going downhill. But that's when I actually won through a reckless swing. So that was pretty fantastic. But really good player. Had a lot of fun talking with him. And then round 4, I played into my good friend Alberto Miracle on Dash. And at this point, we're both 3-0. So we knew that whoever won this was basically locked for top 8. Because we would be 4-0, and then you'd have the best tiebreakers into, going X2 beyond that. So this game actually didn't have as much on the line because we knew it was good for one of us, but we played it out and I did win like very handily. That was the game where I rolled Scabskins the most all day, mostly because I was taking it more for fun. It's my friend, but I rolled a 6 like maybe 3 times in that game. So that was pretty fantastic, and I won that. Then 4-0 going into my 5th round, I played against the other undefeated at that point, who was a 5 player on the Edge of Autumn build. Very good player, Daniel. And I was absolutely stopping that game. I think I was at like 9 life. I had him down to 1. I go through, play my last hand out, and it's like a Blood Rush turn of, like Claw, Boneyard. It's like everything I could want it to be. But then I whiff Blood Debt on the Boneyard. And so all he does is full block, survives at 1, and then I take 10 Blood Debt and die. So that was really unfortunate. Those games just happen. So I was glad it was at least, at a point in my run that didn't really matter. So, taking the loss there, I'm still guaranteed for top 8. It was whatever. Then we go into the last round of the day, and I play against my other good friend who's staying with me, Peyton, and he's on Briar, and he's on this like really janky Yinty Yanty Belittle Briar. And I kind of wanted to play the game out, but at the same time, if I conceded to him, then he was locked for top 8 as well, because I'd be the best tiebreakers at X2. So I cared more about seeing my friend in top 8 than an extra win under my belt. So we didn't even play the game. I just conceded, and then went to go get some food. Then into top 8, I played against the Phi player again, same one I lost to, and this was an absolute stomp. I think I won at like 14 life. I still had Husk up. It was an absolute blowout of a game. So it just really, really went my way. That version of Phi is very abused by having a strong fridge of equipment because it's all about breakpoints. And so was able to use my equipment really well and just out trade him and do what I want to do, land a lot of damage, win the game. Then in top 4, I played against Isaac Kroot, a fantastic player out of Canada. He, I believe, top 4 the Pro Tour. He's on Viserai. He's on the same Viserai build that I played in Swiss. And so I'm terrified because I think that last game that I played in Swiss only really went my way because of the early Blood Rushes. So we play this game out, and it's really like a really tight game. Like, I don't really feel like I'm ahead. We're going through it, but he's really kind of clunking up on his end. He blocked out like a full turn on my swing big, ends up with a quicken. And I noticed, it was like an all attack hand anyway. So we're really like not coming together on either side of us with like the ideal hands. It's a slugfest. And then I finally closed the game out in the very end. I think it was through a dominate or something. And he had the option, like a turn previous, to try to just YOLO lethal on Spellbound with Sonata on my turn to try to ping me for an Arcane and kill me, but he opted to try to play safe, continue to block out, and let me die to Blood Debt, which of course didn't happen in the end because I closed with a Dominate. So that was a great game, and then I move on into the finals with this amazing Levia deck, and we're just having a blast at that point. And then I played against another really good player on Isaac's team who's on the same Viserai deck. At this point, I know the Pied Piper's coming. Like, I've beaten all these Viserais. I have no business beating these Viserais because I still consider it to be like an auto loss for the most part. And there we go. We play the game, and like by turn 3, the game's just instantly over. I've taken like 18 Arcane because he's just drawn things in a sequence where he's just throwing too much arcane damage my way. I'm not able to block effectively at all, so the damage trade is relatively even, but it shouldn't be even in the early game. The way you beat Viserai is you hope that they get their physical damage first, like stuff like Shrill Skull Form, things like that, and then you can block that efficiently. You maintain a life lead, swing back into them, and then when that arcane damage comes through like mid to late, you have the life lead to not just instantly die to it. But instead, at this point, it basically been flipped. He was throwing so much arcane my way that I was too behind to really close it out. And I pretty much knew the game was over by like turn 3 or so, but we continued to play it out. And sure enough, I think I get him down to like 3 life or so, but I just died to arcane. So not the most fun finals there because it was definitely over. We both knew it was over like so early in the game, but it was awesome to get there and really cool to just see how much Crown of Providence did for this deck. Because I really think almost every one of my games, like Crown of Providence was MVP. This card just saved every little bit of clunk that Levia normally deals with. It fixed it right away. Even the ability against an aggro deck to block with this, cycle for a better card, and put this in graveyard is just so much stronger than Arcanite Skullcap was, because Arcanite didn't go to grave, and in an aggro matchup, you a lot of times wanted to keep more cards to trade back better than block heavier in the early game. So Crown was just, man, it just did so much work. So I had a lot of fun. It was a great day. It was a great day for all of us League of Levia members, and hope that, if you want to pick up this deck, feel free to ask any questions in the League of Levia Discord. I'm always around poking at your questions, answering what I can. And this is a really fun one to bring to all your upcoming Road to Nationals. So with that, I'll see you at the US Nationals for sure, and catch you in the next one.